Server Core captured a lot of attention when it was first introduced back in Server 2008. And in Server 2012, it's been beefed up and there's some great new additions to it that's really going to make this thing take off. But first of all, let's start off with some basics. Server Core is a minimal, non-graphical environment for Windows Server. What that means in English, I can install Windows Server 2012 in a full graphical environment, just like you've seen me using with Server Manager, the desktop, the Start menu, all that. Or I can do a Server Core installation. It's just the core functionality. There's no bells, no whistles, no pretty stuff, no graphical environment. Again, this came to us first in Windows Server 2008. It is totally fully managed from a command prompt, and you can also manage it remotely from another server. So you can go set up the management tools, connect to it remotely, and manage it in a graphical user interface, but you can't do it locally. It has to be remotely from another server. Now, what are the advantages of this whole Server Core thing? Well, less maintenance. There's less stuff going on. Smaller attack surface. This is the big one. There are fewer things, fewer services, fewer stuff running, hanging out there, a place for hackers to grab into, hook into, and try to get into the OS. And the real big one, these things take up a whole lot less disk space without all that sugar and sweetness and, eye candy built into that thing. Now, Windows Server 2012 is introducing some incredible new Server Core features. First of all, they're supporting a lot more roles. One of these in particular is very exciting. The first one, remote access, is supported now in a Server Core installation. Windows Server Update Services, or WSUS, is now supported in Server Core. Several role services for remote desktop services have now been added. And here's the big one. You can now run a SQL Server on Server Core. That's going to be a huge hit. Another thing, and this is really nice here, I can very easily migrate between Server Core and a graphical user interface. Then even have a little knob I can turn there, I'll tell you about in just a second. But the bottom line is I can install a graphical user interface, configure it, and then convert it to Server Core. Then if I ever want the graphical user interface back, convert it to GUI just by sending a command. We'll talk about that later on in a separate video. Now there's a new state for Server Core called Minimal Server Interface. Now this is where we can turn on different graphical user interface features independently, so we can turn on only the ones we want, leave off the ones we don't want. And this really is a new mode. You have Server Core, bare bones server. Then you have Minimal Server Interface, where we can turn just some interface stuff on. And then we have the full-blown graphical user interface, with the start screen and on and on and on. All the tools, bells and whistles. So when we're installing Server Core, keep in mind it's very similar to a graphical user interface install. When the installation completes, however, it's where the difference really starts. There is no graphical user interface. You can only configure that server from the command prompt, but I'm going to show you a little bit later. There's still got a little trick on that, and we'll talk about that in configuring Server Core. But for now, pretty straightforward with installing Server Core. Just make sure you know your options and the little different graphical user interface options you have there, and the fact that you can now run SQL Server and remote access on there for the exam. Neat technology here.